Canada's economy served up a big surprise this morning, and not the good kind.
Canada held interest rates steady in their decision this week, but warned the ongoing risk is already causing inflation, and it could get...
This very clearly is the worst energy crisis of our lifetimes. We have lost over 11 million barrels per day of...
Canadian economy is teetering on...
Bank of Canada held interest rates steady in their decision this week, but warned the ongoing risk is already causing inflation, and it could get worse.
Economic problems around the world, the recessions. And today, only as of today, we lost 11 million barrels.
So let me start by saying that the Bank of Canada made a big decision this week. They decided not to change interest rates. They kept them exactly where they were. That might sound like nothing happened, but actually it is a very important signal. The bank is watching the economy very closely. They are worried. They said that there is an ongoing risk, and that risk is already making prices go up. That is what inflation means. Things cost more than they used to. And the bank warned that the problem could get even worse in the near future. So even though they did not raise rates this time, they are telling everyone to be ready. Prices might keep climbing. Groceries, gas, rent, everything could become more expensive. And when the central bank talks like this, people listen. Because they are the ones who try to control inflation by making borrowing more expensive or cheaper.
I'll tell you though, we just went through the largest trade crisis we had ever seen. Now we're piling on another so-called supply shock. The difficult answer here is when we see things we've never seen before, we don't know exactly how they're all going to pan.
That's not a projection. That's not a worst-case scenario from some think tank. That is the actual number already missing from the global supply. The shipments that were already moving, already loaded, already sailing, they're stopping. Ports are sitting empty, and the full shock of that has not even hit consumers yet. What you're feeling at the pump today is just the opening punch.
Right now, they are holding steady, but their words are a warning. Something is not right in the economy. And that something is connected to what is happening around the world, not just inside Canada. So we need to understand what is really going on. This very clearly is the worst energy crisis of our lifetimes. We have lost over 11 million barrels per day of production. Let me explain what this means in simple words. Energy is what powers our cars, our homes, our factories, and almost everything we use. The most important energy source right now is oil.
Gas pumps are among the first places that global consumers are feeling the pinch. Motorists are especially hard hit by higher fuel prices. The increases vary from country to country, with knock-on effects feeding through to the rest of the economy.
I didn't used to. I used to drive my kids to a lot of places. Now I can't afford.
And what we are seeing today is unlike anything people alive today have ever experienced. It is worse than the oil crisis in the 1970s. It is worse than anything after 9/11. It is worse than the financial crisis of 2008, because this time we are not talking about a small shortage. We are talking about a massive loss. Over 11 million barrels of oil every single day are gone. That is like taking every oil-producing country in the world and shutting down one of the biggest ones completely. That amount of oil is not coming back anytime soon. And when supply drops that much, prices go up. It is simple math. Less oil in the world means everyone has to pay more to get what they need. And because oil is used to make gasoline, plastics, fertilizers, and even medicine, the price of everything goes up. So this is not just a problem for drivers. This is a problem for every person who buys food, clothes, or anything made in a factory. We are living through the worst energy crisis of our lifetimes. That is not an exaggeration, that is a fact. I have to tell you, though, we just threw the largest trade crisis we had ever seen. Now we're piling on another so-called supply shock. The difficult answer here is when we see things we've never seen before, we don't know exactly how they're all going to pan out. Now here is where it gets even more complicated. Just when we thought we were getting through one huge crisis, another one comes right after. And the person speaking here is being very honest. They say we just went through the largest trade crisis we have ever seen.
In the West, pump prices have pushed past $2 per liter.
Well, it is what it is, you know. Can't do much about it.
The price for Quebecers is not far behind.
Yeah, of course, it's a big impact for us as as a worker here in Canada. I feel so bad.
That means countries stopped trading with each other the way they used to. There were fights over taxes on goods coming from other countries. There were threats and counter threats. And just as we started to recover from that, now we are adding another problem on top. They call it a supply shock. That means something happens suddenly that stops things from being made or delivered. And the difficult truth is that none of us have seen this combination before. The energy crisis, plus the trade crisis, plus the war, plus the supply shocks, all of them happening at the same time. So even the experts do not know exactly how this will end. They can guess, they can make models, but when things have never happened before, nobody can predict the future with certainty. That is scary for regular people because we want answers. We want to know if prices will go down next month or next year. But the honest answer is that we do not know. And that uncertainty itself causes more problems. Businesses do not want to invest. Workers do not know if they will have jobs. Families do not know how to budget. So we are all living in a time of not knowing. I didn't used to. I used to drive my kids to a lot of places. Now I can't afford that. This is a real person talking, a parent.
Provinces not positioned to cash in on resource royalties are less likely to cut into their own bottom lines, leaving consumers to bear the brunt of what could be some tough weeks ahead.
This war is a political crisis, and we see it's never going to end. We don't have bombs, but we do have high prices for everything.
The minister keeps talking about how he's going to reinforce our industry, how he's going to protect our economy or solidify our economy. But when you talk about industry and economy, you're often not talking about people. You're not talking about how that help is getting to people.
Of a strategic oil stockpile in Canada. We are the only G7 country without one. So I think it's another illusion for Mark Carney to pretend that he's releasing stockpiles that he does not have.
Someone who remembers how life used to be before all of this. They say they did not used to worry about driving. They used to take their kids to school, to sports, to friends' houses, to the park, to the mall. They did it without thinking twice, because gas was affordable. But now everything has changed. Now they cannot afford to drive their kids to a lot of places. They have to say no. They have to tell their children, sorry, we cannot go there today because gas costs too much. That is heartbreaking. It is not just about money. It is about the little freedoms that make family life enjoyable. Driving your kids around is not a luxury. It is a normal part of being a parent. But now that normal thing is becoming a luxury. And when you have to choose between buying food and driving to see grandparents, you choose food. But you should not have to make that choice. So this one sentence from this parent tells you more about the crisis than any economic report. Because behind every number is a family making painful decisions. Well, it is what it is, you know. Can't do much about it. This is another voice. This person sounds tired. They sound like they have given up fighting.
84,000 jobs last month. That's one of the worst monthly drops ever outside of the pandemic. Speaking from Norway, Prime Minister Mark Carney blamed U.S. tariffs.
Given the scale of the trade actions, the uncertainty that is associated as well as with the trade actions by the United States, that is causing big adjustments.
In the jobs report, and it was catastrophic. Canada lost 84,000 jobs in a single month. To put that into perspective, that is one of the worst monthly employment collapses since the pandemic shutdowns. These are not seasonal adjustments or statistical noise. Companies facing higher energy costs, tighter margins, and uncertain demand are making the same calculation everywhere.
Iran. Excuse me? That is nothing to do with house prices. We don't import wood to build houses or concrete to build houses from Iran. That's just completely wrong. And Evan Solomon, the AI minister, again started blaming these job numbers and the affordability crisis on February and January's job numbers on the Iran situation which started in...
They say, well, it is what it is. That means they accept that things are bad and they do not see any way to change them. They feel powerless. And honestly, a lot of people feel the same way. When you turn on the news and you see wars, trade fights, energy shortages, and political leaders arguing, you start to think that nothing you do will make a difference. So you just shrug and say, can't do much about it. Feeling of helplessness is dangerous. Because when people stop believing that things can get better, they stop trying. They stop voting. They stop speaking up. They stop looking for solutions. And that is exactly what the big companies and the rich people want.
That when gas prices rise, consumers, well, they have to allocate more money towards gasoline, and that means a little less money elsewhere, or it means they pull down on savings, or they have to use credit cards, or all of the above. So a little bit of consumer weakness here should be expected, but the magnitude of that and how long it lasts.
They want you to feel small. They want you to think that you cannot change anything. But the truth is, regular people can make a difference. They can drive less. They can buy local. They can support leaders who have real plans. They can talk to their neighbors. But right now, the feeling is heavy. And many people are just surviving, not living. Yeah, of course. It's a big impact for us, as you know, as a worker here in Canada. I feel so bad about it. Now, this is a worker speaking, someone who gets up every day and goes to work, someone who pays taxes and tries to provide for their family. They say the impact is big, and they feel bad about it. Not just worried, not just annoyed, bad. That is an emotional word.
Also a question mark is what happens to inflation with the impact of the war. We saw it below that 2% marker before the war, and so the Bank of Canada holding interest rates where they were, where they are now. But where might things be heading if Canadian families, Canadian business have to spend more for the very same products?
Well, the simple calculation is that if we have oil around $100 per barrel, you'll see inflation rise.
The combination of tighter credit and higher costs is exactly the environment where business failures cluster and unemployment spikes. This is not a warning about what could happen. The early signals are already visible.
Oh, wow.
Folks filling up in Nova Scotia Tuesday paid an extra 7 cents per litre after a price adjustment overnight.
It affects everything from the top down.
It's the same story across the country. Prices on the West Coast approaching $2.17 and on the East Coast beyond $1.88. The national average at the pumps now $1.73.5.
Oil stored underground or in tanks. They do not use it for everyday needs. They save it for emergencies. If there is a war or a disaster or a sudden shortage, they can release that oil to bring prices down. The United States has one. Japan has one. Germany has one. France, Italy, the United Kingdom, all of them have one. But Canada does not. Canada is the only rich country in the G7 that has no emergency oil reserve. That is shocking when you think about it. Canada is a huge oil producer, but that oil is mostly owned by private companies. The government does not have a stockpile it can control. So when someone like Mark Carney, who is a famous economist and former central banker, talks about releasing stockpiles, it sounds good.
Canada's LNG sector was supposed to be a bright spot. With European nations desperately looking for alternatives to Russian gas and Asian demand growing steadily, Canadian liquefied natural gas exports looked like a major revenue opportunity.
Middle East and Iran's effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz has sent oil prices up about 57% this month, which has a ripple effect through global supply chains.
If you're not going to pay for it at the pump, you might pay for it when you're buying clothes. If you are buying shampoo, if you are buying deodorant, all of these things have petroleum in them.
What can you do? Like, we already drive as little as we can. Certainly we're making choices based on.
Person speaking here says it is an illusion, because you cannot release something you do not have. So it is like pretending to have money in the bank when your account is empty. That is frustrating for Canadians who hear these big promises and then see nothing change. They want real solutions, not fake ones. This war is a political crisis, and we see it's never going to end. We don't have bombs, but we do have high prices for everything. Now, this person is talking about the war. They say it is a political crisis. That means the war is not just about soldiers and battles. It is about power, control, and old grudges between countries. And the person says they see it is never going to end. That is a very dark thing to say. But many people feel that way. Wars in some parts of the world have been going on for decades. They stop and start. They change shape, but they never fully go away. And while Canada is not dropping bombs, we are feeling the effects. Because war disrupts trade. War makes oil and grain and metals more expensive. So even though we are far away from the fighting, we pay higher prices for everything: gas, bread, steel, aluminum, even the plastic in your phone case, everything. So the war becomes part of our daily lives. We do not hear gunshots, but we see the price tags, and that is its own kind of suffering. It is slow, it is invisible, but it is very real. Given the scale of the trade actions, the uncertainty that is associated, as well as with the trade actions by the United States, that is causing, big adjustments in the Canadian economy. This is someone trying to explain what is happening with trade. The United States has been taking trade actions. That means they have been putting taxes, also called tariffs, on goods coming from other countries.
All time it might be absorbed, but if things continue in the same pace, then it's going to be passed on to the
Canadians concerned about their cost of living now facing the impact of a war out of their country.
We do have global problems, so we cannot discount or try to control what President Trump does. But all the countries are facing those tariffs. None of them have a shrinking economy.
So, between those job losses and rising gas prices, could the political ground start to shift under the Prime Minister?
Including Canada. And these are not small actions. The scale is huge. So, there is a lot of uncertainty. Nobody knows what the United States will do next. Will they add more tariffs? Will they take them away? Will they target specific industries? That uncertainty forces Canadian businesses to make big adjustments. They have to find new suppliers. They have to change their prices. They have to lay off workers or hire different ones. The entire Canadian economy has to shift because of what the United States does. And that is not easy. Changing an economy is like turning a big ship. It takes time and it causes disruption. So workers and families feel that disruption in their paychecks and in their bills. Canadians can't afford housing because of the war in Iran. Now, this is a statement that some people believe. They say the reason housing is so expensive in Canada is because of the war in Iran. But is that true? Let us think about it. Iran is far away. Canada does not buy wood from Iran to build houses. Canada does not buy concrete or bricks or nails from Iran. So how would a war in Iran make housing more expensive in Toronto or Vancouver? The connection is not direct. But some people try to connect everything to the war because they want a simple answer. The truth is, housing prices in Canada went up for many reasons. Low interest rates for many years, not enough houses being built, foreign investment, people moving to big cities, speculation. All of these things happened before the war in Iran got worse. So blaming the war for housing prices is not accurate. But it is an easy thing to say. And sometimes people repeat easy things without checking if they are true. That has nothing to do with house prices. We don't import wood to build houses or concrete to build houses from Iran. That's just completely wrong. Here is someone pushing back. They say very clearly that the war in Iran has nothing to do with house prices in Canada, because the materials used to build houses in Canada come from Canada, from the United States, and from other countries like Brazil or China, not from Iran. So saying the war in Iran is causing expensive housing is just completely wrong. And this person is frustrated because they want people to understand the real causes. They want honest conversations. They do not want politicians or anyone else to use distant wars as an excuse for local problems. Because if you blame the wrong thing, you will never fix the real problem. And the real problem for housing in Canada is not enough supply, too much demand, and policies that have not kept up with growth. So this person is trying to set the record straight. The Prime Minister keeps talking about how he's going to reinforce our industry, how he's going to protect our economy or solidify our economy. But when you talk about industry and economy, you're often not talking about people. You're not talking about how that help is getting to people directly. Now, this is a very important point. The Prime Minister says big words. He says, reinforce our industry, protect our economy, solidify our economy. These sound good. But the person speaking here says that when you talk about industry and economy, you are often not talking about people. Industry means factories and companies. Economy means numbers like GDP and stock markets. But people are not numbers. People need food on the table, they need rent money, they need gas in the car, they need medicine. So when the Prime Minister talks about helping the economy, that does not automatically help regular people. The help has to reach them directly. It has to be things like lower taxes on gasoline, direct payments to families, rent control, or subsidies for groceries. But if the help only goes to big businesses, regular people do not feel it. So this person is saying that the Prime Minister's words sound nice, but they are empty if the help does not reach the people who are struggling the most. Unfortunately, we know that when gas prices rise, consumers, well, they have to allocate more money towards gasoline, and that means a little less money elsewhere, or it means they pull down on savings, or they have to use credit cards, or all of the above. So a little bit of consumer weakness here should be expected, but the magnitude of that and how long it lasts is still a question mark. Let me break this down. When gas prices go up, people have to spend more of their money on gas. That is not a choice. They need to drive to work, to school, to the store, so they take money from somewhere else. Maybe they spend less on eating out. Maybe they spend less on clothes. Maybe they stop going to the movies. Or they pull money from their savings. That means they use money they were trying to save for emergencies or for retirement. Or they use credit cards. That means they borrow money and pay interest. All of these options are bad, so we should expect that consumers, regular people, will be weaker. They will buy less. That hurts businesses. But the big question is how much weaker and for how long? Will it be a small slowdown that lasts a few months? Or will it be a big recession that lasts years? Nobody knows yet. That is the question mark. And that uncertainty makes everyone nervous. Also a question mark is what happens to inflation with the impact of the war. We saw it below that 2% marker before the war. And so the Bank of Canada holding interest rates where they are now. But where might things be heading if Canadian families, Canadian business, have to spend more for these very same products? Before the war, inflation was below 2%. That is considered healthy. Prices were going up slowly. But then the war started and inflation went up. Now the Bank of Canada is holding interest rates steady. But the question is, what happens next? If Canadian families and businesses have to spend more for the same products, meaning food, fuel, and raw materials, then inflation could go up again. And if inflation goes up, the bank might have to raise interest rates. That would make borrowing more expensive. Mortgages, car loans, credit cards, all of them would cost more. So families would be squeezed even harder. They would pay more for daily things and more for borrowing. That is a scary possibility. So everyone is watching to see what happens with the war and with prices. Well, the simple calculation is that if we have oil around $100 per barrel, you'll see inflation rise above 3%. Here is a simple calculation. If oil costs around $100 per barrel, then inflation will go above 3%. That means the prices of everything will go up by more than 3% in 1 year. That is a lot. For a family with a monthly budget of $5,000, 3% is an extra $150 per month. That is almost $2,000 per year. That money has to come from somewhere. So families cut back. They save less. They go into debt. And if oil goes even higher, inflation goes even higher. So the price of oil is one of the most important numbers for regular people. It is not just a number on a screen, it is the cost of living. If you're not going to pay for it at the pump, you might pay for it when you're buying clothes. If you are buying shampoo, if you are buying deodorant, all of these things have petroleum in them. This is something a lot of people do not realize. You think that high oil prices only affect gasoline, but that is not true. Oil is used to make so many things. Clothes are made from synthetic fibers like polyester. Those fibers come from petroleum. Shampoo and deodorant contain chemicals that come from oil. Plastic bottles, plastic bags, food containers, all from oil. Even some medicines and fertilizers come from oil. So even if you do not drive a car, you still pay for high oil prices every time you buy clothes, shampoo, or almost anything in a plastic package. So you cannot escape it. You either pay at the pump or you pay at the store. Either way, you pay. What can you do? Like, we already drive as little as we can. Certainly, we're making choices based on the prices. This person is asking a fair question. What can you do? They say they already drive as little as they can. They are not taking joyrides. They are not being wasteful. They are already being careful, but it is still not enough. So they are making choices based on prices. That means they look at the price of everything before they buy it. They compare. They delay. They say no. They choose the cheaper option even if they do not like it as much. That is how regular people survive. They adapt. But there is a limit to how much you can adapt. You cannot stop eating. You cannot stop heating your home in winter. You cannot stop driving to work if there is no bus. So the choices become harder and harder. For a small time, it might be absorbed, but if things continue in the same pace, then it's going to be passed on to the consumer. Here is how business works. When costs go up, like the cost of oil or shipping or materials, businesses try to absorb those costs for a little while. They take less profit. They hope things get better. But if the high costs continue at the same pace, they cannot absorb them forever. Eventually, they have to pass those costs on to the consumer. That means you pay more. So the question is, how long will this last? If it is short, businesses might protect you. If it is long, you will feel the full impact. And everything we are seeing suggests this is not short. This is long. So prices will keep going up. It is true we do have global problems and we cannot discount or try to control what President Trump does. But all the countries are facing those tariffs. None of them have a shrinking economy. Finally, this person is making a very sharp point. They agree that there are global problems. They agree that Canada cannot control what the American president does. That is true. But then they say something important. All countries are facing the same tariffs from the United States. Mexico faces them, China faces them, Europe faces them, Japan faces them, but none of those countries have a shrinking economy. Their economies are still growing. So why is Canada different? Why is Canada's economy shrinking when others are not? The person is hinting that the problem is not just the tariffs. The problem is also how Canada is run, the policies, the leadership. So we come back to where we started. The Bank of Canada held interest rates steady, but they warned us. The ongoing risk is already making prices go up, and it could get worse. That is the message we need to remember. We are in the middle of something big. It is not over. The energy crisis, the trade crisis, the war, the supply shocks, all of them are still happening. The bank is watching, but the bank cannot fix everything. In the end, it is up to all of us to understand what is happening, to make smart choices, to support each other, and to demand better from our leaders. The road ahead is hard, but we have been through hard times before. And if we are honest about the problems, if we stop pretending and start acting, we can find a way through. Not easily, not quickly, but together.